Picture this, a cold stone cell in a German convent, straw on the floor. A pale, gaunt woman kneels in prayer, her face hollowed by hunger, her skin stretched tight over her bones. Her hands are raw from scrubbing floors. Her lips move silently, repeating a single prayer over and over, while her body trembles with fever. She is only 24 years old, but she has already given away her entire fortune, refused remarriage, and reduced herself to a life of filth and starvation. Not because she was imprisoned, not because she was punished, but because she believed, truly, desperately believed, that her suffering was love. Her name was Elisabeth of Hungary. A royal princess, a wife, a mother, and a saint. You've probably seen her in medieval paintings, the beautiful young woman carrying roses in her apron, a gentle smile, a halo. But what those paintings never show is what happened after her husband died, after her family betrayed her, after the church realized what they could make of a woman who wanted to disappear. This isn't just a story about piety, it's a story about obsession, about a young girl raised in a palace, praised for her beauty and virtue, who slowly, year by year, began to believe that the only way to be good was to suffer. And so she gave everything, her jewels, her body, her dignity, until there was almost nothing left. She was canonized just 4 years after her death. But maybe we should ask, was Elisabeth a saint, or was she a victim of spiritual abuse so intense it became holy? Because when you dig past the flowers and miracles, what you find is something much darker. A girl with a fractured identity, a woman driven by grief, guilt, and indoctrination, and a church that turned her self-annihilation into a model for women for centuries to come. If this kind of hidden history speaks to you, stories that are emotional, personal, and haunting, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it allows us to keep digging up these forgotten human tragedies buried beneath the surface of world history. And while you're here, tell me in the comments, have you ever heard of Elisabeth of Hungary before today? And if so, was it as the gentle saint with roses, or the starving girl in the convent? I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from too, because whether you're in Europe, Asia, the Americas, or anywhere else, these ancient stories are all of our history. We're not just here to memorize facts, we're here to feel the past. Now, to understand Elisabeth's tragic transformation, we need to go back, before the sainthood, before the starvation, to the fairy tale beginning, or at least what looked like one. Let's start with the girl herself. Elisabeth of Hungary was born in 1207 into staggering wealth. She was a princess, daughter of King Andrew II of Hungary, and from the moment she was born, her future wasn't hers to decide. At just 4 years old, she was sent away from her home to be raised in Thuringia, a German principality, because she'd already been promised in marriage to a nobleman she'd never met. Imagine that. You're 4 years old, you don't speak the language, you're surrounded by strangers, and everyone around you is already treating you like a piece on a political chessboard. That early rupture, ripped from her family, her culture, her identity, wasn't just political, it left a mark. Because the Elisabeth who emerged from childhood wasn't like other girls of her class. While other noble daughters were taught to dress finely and command servants, Elisabeth walked barefoot. She snuck away from banquets to feed lepers. She prayed for hours, sometimes weeping from the effort. It might have looked virtuous, but even early on, something was off. Servants reported that she slept on the floor instead of her bed. She fasted constantly, even as a child, and she once told her confessor that when she prayed, she begged God to let her suffer so that she could feel closer to Christ. This wasn't ordinary piety. This was a little girl already associating love with pain. But then came Ludwig. He was the man she was promised to marry, and shockingly, he turned out to be kind. Unlike so many arranged marriages of the time, Elisabeth and Ludwig genuinely loved each other. He supported her charity work. He defended her when the court mocked her barefoot prayers, and she adored him with a kind of intensity that bordered on worship. For a brief time, Elisabeth knew happiness. They had 3 children. She gave away food to the poor. She built hospitals. And all the while, Ludwig shielded her from the scorn of the court, which saw her as fanatical. She would kiss the hands of beggars, wash the feet of the sick, hold dying peasants in her arms. But here's where the seeds of tragedy were already sprouting, because even in those years of joy, Elisabeth didn't just want to serve. She wanted to disappear. She would tell her ladies-in-waiting that she wished she could become a poor beggar woman, unknown to anyone, utterly forgotten. To be seen at all made her uncomfortable. It was as though part of her believed that being loved was a sin. And then Ludwig died. It was 1227. Ludwig had joined the Sixth Crusade. He never made it home. News of his death shattered Elisabeth. She was only 20 years old with 3 small children, and in that moment, something inside her broke beyond repair. She didn't mourn like a queen. She mourned like a penitent. She cut off her hair. She wore nothing but a simple gray dress of rough wool. She renounced all her jewels, her wealth, her courtly privileges. And then her in-laws, who had always disapproved of her behavior, struck. They evicted her from the castle with her children in the dead of winter. Elisabeth wandered through the streets, begging for food and shelter, a former princess, now homeless. And here's where the tragedy takes a darker turn, because Elisabeth didn't fight back. She didn't try to reclaim her power or defend her children's inheritance. Instead, she saw it all as divine justice, proof that she was finally suffering enough. And in her desperation to find meaning in that pain, she made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She aligned herself with the Franciscan order, an extreme branch of the church that believed in total poverty, self-denial, and suffering as a path to holiness. And under the guidance of a harsh spiritual director named Conrad of Marburg, Elisabeth gave up everything. Conrad was not a gentle man. He was a fanatic, even by medieval standards. He had made a name for himself as a ruthless inquisitor, hunting heretics and witches with zero tolerance. Torture was his tool of choice. Obedience was his god. And now he was assigned to guide the grieving young widow. Conrad's influence was immediate and devastating. He ordered her to obey him absolutely. He scrutinized every word she spoke. He interrogated her daily, searching her soul for signs of pride. And he punished her relentlessly. He forbade her from giving away any money without his approval. He beat her when she questioned his orders. And he insisted that any joy she experienced was a temptation from the devil. But Elisabeth obeyed, because she believed that the more she hurt, the more she pleased God. She moved into a hospital she had founded, not as a patron, but as a servant. She lived in a small wooden shack beside the sick and the dying. She wore rags, she ate scraps, and she treated lepers with her bare hands, often sleeping on the cold stone floor. One story says that when she felt tempted to eat a piece of meat, she forced herself to chew and then spit it out. Another says she wore a hair shirt underneath her dress, a scratchy garment designed to inflict constant discomfort without telling anyone. Why? Because pain had become her proof of love, and Conrad, he didn't stop her, he encouraged it. In one report, he denied her the Eucharist, the very sacrament she lived for, because she had dared to express emotion while praying. He told her that her grief for Ludwig was selfish, that even her tears were suspect. This wasn't spiritual guidance, it was psychological warfare. And yet, the more he broke her down, the more she submitted, because Elisabeth had internalized something devastating, that her body was a problem, that her joy was pride, that love meant obliteration. And the church loved it, because here was a perfect symbol, a royal woman who had willingly thrown away her crown, a widow who rejected remarriage, a noble who scrubbed the floors of hospitals. She became their living ideal, an image of womanhood rooted in silence, suffering, and service. They wrote glowing accounts of her charity, her chastity, her obedience. They painted her with halos, soft smiles, and delicate roses, hiding the starvation, the trauma, the bruises on her back. And when she died at just 24 years old, from exhaustion and illness brought on by her lifestyle, they made her a saint. Only 4 years later, she was canonized, and among the miracles attributed to her, none had to do with healing herself. Only others, because Elisabeth had never been allowed to be her own person, only a vessel. A vessel for her husband, a vessel for the poor, a vessel for God, and finally, a vessel for the church's agenda. So what does this story really tell us? What makes the life of Elisabeth of Hungary so haunting isn't just that she died young, or that she gave everything to the poor. It's that behind the image of sainthood lies a deeply unsettling reality. Elisabeth didn't just choose holiness, she chose annihilation. She believed that to be good was to disappear, that love meant obedience, that the only path to God was through the obliteration of her own needs, desires, and even her body. And the people around her, especially men like Conrad, didn't rescue her from that belief. They praised it, they built a theology around it, and they turned her into an icon of holy femininity, quiet, starving, submissive, and dead before 25. But Elisabeth's story raises a chilling question. What happens when sainthood becomes indistinguishable from self-destruction? She is remembered as a rose in winter, but look closer, and you see thorns driven deep into her skin. Because the tragedy of Elisabeth of Hungary isn't just that she was canonized, it's that she was consumed. Elisabeth's life was framed as a triumph of faith. But in truth, it was a slow erosion of the self, applauded, sanctified, and frozen in stained glass. She lived a life of relentless sacrifice, but not one that was freely chosen. She was molded, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed by a world that saw women as symbols rather than souls. And yet, maybe that's why her story still matters. Because it forces us to ask, who benefits from our suffering? Who defines what it means to be good? And when do virtues like obedience and piety cross the line into erasure? Elisabeth of Hungary isn't just a saint. She's a mirror, and what we see reflected there isn't always holy. If this story moved you or unsettled you, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you feel? And if you want more stories like this, stories that pull back the curtain on the myths we've been told, subscribe and check out the other videos on this channel. Because history isn't just about empires and wars. Sometimes it's about one young woman alone in the dark, begging to suffer.